And we're live. It is Friday, April 18th. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. in Washington, D.C. What time is it in Spain, Ruth?
If I were more Spanish conversant, I could give it to you in Spanish, but it is 2 p.m., which at least is 14 o'clock.
Yeah, it is 14 o'clock in Spain. Folks, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day, and you are watching Dogshirt TV, and it is a revolution in morning television. And one of the more revolutionary features, and there are many, is that sometimes I wake up in the morning and I have no idea who the guest is going to be, and I remember that Ruth Marcus is in Spain, where this is a civilized hour. And so I text her about half an hour before the show that says something like, I assume you're coming on the show today. And she responds, I'm on a train. And I said, well, that's okay. And, you know, how's the Wi-Fi on the train? And I was sort of joking, but she responded that the Wi-Fi was pretty good. And so we decided to make a go of it. And another one of the revolutionary features, because there are many, is that we are not detained by things like production values or whether we have any idea what we're going to be talking about, or the fact that our guest is on a moving train. And I dare to say, since her resignation from the Washington Post, this is the first live interview that Ruth has given from a moving train. And that last caveat is probably very important. So look, folks, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Ruth Marcus in Spain with all the background noise on a moving train. Welcome to Dogshirt TV.
You're giving up an opportunity to say on a train, on a plane in Spain, with no rain.
Correct.
And I will not burst. I will not burst into song.
I did give up that opportunity, but fortunately you did not. We may or may not be having Marty Lederman joining us. One of the other revolutionary features of the show is that, you know, sometimes I text Marty Lederman and say, are you coming on the show? And he doesn't say yes or no. He just asks me what time. And I tell him it's always 8 o'clock. He never remembers. And so I send him a link, and then he either shows up or he doesn't.
I know he's up because he's been texting me. Oh, so yeah, I would take it I would take it personally if I were you.
I always try to take it personally with Marty. And, you know, so we will, of course, make fun of him if he doesn't show up. But Ruth, how are you doing? How is your manic energy?
My manic energy is very high. My husband has just shushed me, though we are not in, however you say, quiet car in Spanish. So my manic energy is so high.
To Aragua?
No, oh, very funny. Too soon for that one.
Yeah, right.
Because if I said that and I'm outside the country, I don't know about my ability to re-enter. I think my manic energy is about as high as, say, Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson's, which is to say really impressively high. God bless Judge Wilkinson.
So let's talk about that, because Judge Wilkinson is, I guess there are a few traits of Judge Wilkinson that are relevant here. One is that he is a conservative known for deference to, hello, Marty Lederman. He is a conservative known for
they're on the same side.
Specifically deference to the executive branch, and that is, you know, one of his part of his brand. But the other thing is that he is a exceedingly genteel and non-vituperative individual who always goes out of his way to be warm and respectful in his writing, including his judicial writing, even when he's having fierce fights. He's a he is a real gentleman. And this was not exactly a gentlemanly opinion. And so I was surprised less by the substance of it than by the tone.
You know, I would say that I was not necessarily surprised by the tone, because I'm going to say some things in defense of the tone, which was
Oh,
strong but
wait,
understandable.
to be
Yeah,
clear, I'm not criticizing the tone.
yeah,
I share
yeah. But
the feelings
yeah,
behind the tone. I note that it it was not a, you know, if you had put that opinion in front of me and said who wrote it, I would have been J. Harvey Wilkinson would not have been high on my list 6 weeks ago.
I actually would have
well,
thought that is Jay Wilkinson.
Really?
Yep, absolutely.
Explain.
Well, no, let Ruth get in first.
good morning, Marty. Well,
Good
buenos
afternoon.
dias.
Good afternoon, Ruth.
Yes. So I would start out by saying, to amplify what you had to say about Judge Wilkinson, that he is what Grammy Hall would call a real conservative. He was named to the bench by Ronald Reagan. He is a believer, as you said, in executive power. He is not, I'm sure that the president will have some left-wing lunatic things to say about it, but nothing could be further from the truth. And I think that was manifested in the opinion that he beautifully speed wrote yesterday for the three judges on the Fourth Circuit panel. He goes out of his way to talk about the respect that should be shown to the executive branch, particularly in areas of foreign policy. He goes out of his way to talk about the fact that judges are fallible and they're just doing their best effort, and that everybody should be open to criticism. He goes out of his way, I think, in a way that I'm afraid will prove to be not correct, but very impressive and very Wilkinsonian that he does so at the end, to hope that the better angels of the nature of the Trump administration, spoiler alert, these do not
Which
exist.
ones are those? Yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Miller has no better angels. Kristi Noem has no better angels. Our Attorney General has no better angels. But he ends by expressing hope that they will read his opinion or otherwise think about his points and suddenly see the light. So I would say with Marty, and then I will cede to let Marty explain why I'm right, that it is a Wilkinsonian opinion, and that's beautiful. I think people in America today, students in America today, will grow up to be law students, and they will have this opinion sent to them to read.
Marty?
Yeah, it's already getting a lot of circulation in my law school before. As Ruth said, pretty amazing. He didn't wait for the other side to read it. He wrote it very, very quickly. He feels very strongly about it. It is very gentlemanly. It's strongly written because what he's...
Marty, your level is really low. Can you turn up your gain or speak more loudly?
I don't know I'm technologically impaired. So where do I go?
I don't know what kind of computer you have. You maybe just talk loud.
No one's ever accused me of speaking too softly. Okay. Is this any better at all?
That's better.
Okay, I was going to say, yes, it's already getting a lot of circulation in my law school. I know that. From, among faculty, from faculty to students, it's sort of a necessary corrective. I will say that it doesn't stand alone. I think it stands with the opinions that Judge Zinnes and Judge Boasberg wrote within 48 hours before it. And you put the three of them together, and they tell a very common story, and it's one that the three of us and most of your viewers are very, very familiar with. But it's the beginning of the pushback, as was, for that matter, in a much more mild way, as was the Supreme Court opinion in this case.
And the JGG case.
And well, no, not so much.
But Marty's not a fan of JGG.
Well, I'm not a fan of it either, but it did say that everybody's entitled to, before you can throw them on a plane, they're entitled to some judicial review. And by the way, you can't use the Alien Enemies Act without any process. And that's a 9-0 opinion.
It is, and I'm not blaming the Chief Justice because I don't know the dynamic there. He is trying to maneuver a couple of different things. One is that he has 9 justices, some of whom insist upon the carve-outs and the pro-executive rhetoric that they're driving trucks through in order to sign on to these things. And he's also got timing in mind. When is the right time for the court to push back? We don't want to confront a situation in which we get to the point of the executive branch actually disregarding what the Supreme Court says. And I don't know that Roberts is calibrating this incorrectly, given what he knows about what's going on in his building. That said, all of these opinions are of a piece. Who are they trying to appeal to? I think they're thinking about that too. It's obviously not Kristi Noem or Stephen Miller or Donald Trump or Pam Bondi. It might be in the first instance some of the political attorneys who've been appointed, Yaakov, Ross and Hash Mupon and Beth Harris, folks at DOJ.
And Drew Ensign.
Huh?
And Drew Ensign, who's the guy who actually has to go in front of these judges and make this argument.
But he doesn't have the same sort of standing in the conservative community that these
Correct.
Folks do. And at some point, I have to say, I am somewhat shocked that some of these lawyers are putting their names to the briefs that they are signing. And they don't have a choice, right? It is obvious that their clients will not let them write the sorts of briefs that DOJ would typically write. So they have a choice between staying in these jobs or filing these briefs which sully their names or their reputations, and more importantly, sully the reputation and the standing of the Department of Justice and of the government. And I don't know how they're sleeping at night, quite honestly, but I'm a different sort of person than they are.
Well, you don't sleep at night either, Marty, judging from the times of your tweets. But that's for a different reason.
That's right. So I do think it was very Wilkinsonian and gentlemanly in that he's pleading for the executive branch to act the way the executive branch ought to be acting. And they're doing anything but, right? They're doing anything but, and all of the opinions are designed to just be painting a record for someone, for the public, for law students, for principled lawyers within the government, that this is not an acceptable way for an executive branch to act. The technical legal questions are really almost beside the point.
Right.
Any other time in our history, any other executive branch, upon realizing they had made the mistake with Abreu Garcia, would have just gone and gotten him back. And if they think that they can remove him through proper process, they would have done it. There would have been no question about that. It wouldn't have even been a discussion. There wouldn't have been a 10-minute meeting about it. It would have been obvious to do that sort of thing. In this administration, it's virtually the opposite. It's that they start.
Can I interrupt there for 1 second? I think this is really important because that's my favorite part of Judge Wilkinson's opinion is where he says 2 things that we need to keep in mind, which is maybe he's a terrorist, dangerous, ranking member of a terrorist gang, and would be dangerous to return to the United States, as the administration claims or sometimes claims. But maybe he's not. And wouldn't a responsible administration that cared about justice want to find out the answer to that question? And then he says the second thing, which is, and the administration acknowledges, though Stephen Miller seems to dispute, that it made a mistake here. And I would really like to be a federal judge in this case to ask, does the administration continue to acknowledge that this was an administrative oversight or not? And if you've made an error, wouldn't a person try to fix the error? And you can almost see Judge Wilkinson being incapable of understanding the mindset of malevolent, to use your favorite word, Ben, vindictiveness that animates this administration. But I think we all need to ask those two really basic questions.
I think that's exactly right. And just to be clear, I am not surprised that J. Harvey Wilkinson wrote this opinion. I've known him for a very long time. I think highly of him. And I find it is a very weird place to be, that, the two sort of conservative lions of the Fourth Circuit who were jockeying in the late 90s and early aughts
Indeed.
for the title of the conscience of the judicial conservative movement, the sort of
They were jockeying for something else.
They were jockeying for Supreme Court seats too, and there was never an opinion that one wrote that another didn't either concur but write separately or dissent from, were J. Harvey Wilkinson and Mike Ludig. And these are two men who are, one of them literally the other day is fundraising on Blue Sky for lawfare, and the other is writing this opinion. I don't think that was not on my bingo card. There's another really important word in Wilkinson's opinion, which is he goes out of his way to refer to Policinis as a fine district judge. And this strikes me as an important messaging device because Wilkinson is, among other things, a very savvy political observer. And he understands that, part of the playbook is, she was appointed by Barack Obama, smear the district judge, right? She's got a name that sounds like maybe she doesn't come from here. By the way, the name is Greek. But, there's something mildly exotic about having a name that starts with X, right? So you have, an
Unless you're a Musk child.
Right, or you're Xerxes or something. But, just as there was an attempt to go after Jim Boasberg, there is going to be a slime the district judge, which has already started to happen. And so to have Wilkinson in the first couple paragraphs of this basically say, as in his capacity as one of the elder statesmen of the conservative judicial movement on the bench, this is a very fine district judge, and she's right, and it's uncomplicated. I think that actually is an important statement as well. It's a single word, but you don't normally include an evaluation of the performance of the district judge or the character of the district judge outside of the contours of the facts of the handling of the specific case. And this is a gratuitous adjective that he stuck on to say, don't make this a Obama-appointed, unelected judge tries to run foreign policy thing. This is a very fine district judge doing her job, and she's right. And I think there's something valuable about that.
And especially, Ben, I think it's especially true because he had been somewhat different than the majority on the panel in his concurrence when he suggested that perhaps she went too far, when she said that he had to be, that Abrego Garcia his return had to be effectuated as opposed to facilitated. So he was like, and I think that the signal that he's sending is in particular a signal to his superiors at the Supreme Court. You may not know this judge, but I do, and I am vouching for her, even if I had some
reservations,
technical difficulties.
And that's actually the thing, just as an aside, and circle back to the point, Ben, about that JGG decision in the court. The thing about that decision that most disturbed me was they already know that about Jeff Boasberg, right? They know very well that there's no judge with greater integrity and skill and judgment on the bench than Judge Boasberg. And I think the conservative justices know that very well. And yet the choice they took was to say basically that he was asserting jurisdiction he didn't have and reaching out, and the case needed to be taken from him. And I think that was a huge error. You see, even yesterday, Judge Ho writing an opinion in a death penalty case in which he gratuitously lashes out at Judge Boasberg and others, in his campaign to be on the Supreme Court, grotesque, opinion. And I think that hanging out Judge Boasberg to dry by the Supreme Court was a mistake. I wouldn't say that if there was grounds for saying, oh, really, maybe the jurisdictional argument was a good one, and it should be done by these various different judges on habeas in these various districts. But it's a miserable argument. There's nothing to it. It was clear that he had jurisdiction. I think they were saying not in a way of trying to, moderate and push the ball down, kick the can down the road. But that's not the way to do it, was not to take this case away from him. And his opinion, his whole contempt opinion, and, and this, this is what you wanted to talk about.
Let's talk about the contempt opinion, because, on the one hand, they pulled the rug out from under him. And on the other hand, there's some pretty strong law that, you don't get to defy an order because the Supreme Court later agrees with you that there was something defective about the order. And I'm curious whether you think that, the law on that seems really pretty black letter. I'm curious whether you think that will have legs.
So that I was going to say that part of it is not going to be disputed. That's true. Even after you lose jurisdiction, the orders that you issued before you did, or even if you didn't have jurisdiction, you have to comply with orders. That's not where the context is going to be. It's also not really about the technical questions about whether someone could be held in contempt and prosecuted. Can you still hear me? Prosecuted for contempt.
Hey, Ruth, keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, because that way we can hear Marty better.
Well, now you're muted, Ruth.
Now you're muted and speaking.
So I think the lesson here is, when we're speaking, we should mute ourselves, and when we're not speaking, we should.
Right, it'll be a silent show. Everyone will like it better.
So I was saying, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on legal questions about whether someone can be held in contempt, whether an independent prosecutor can prosecute someone for contempt. Who would that be? Which officials? Could you prove their mens rea? Could you prove that they knew it? I don't think that's the principal focus. Obviously, it's the framing of his opinion, but it's not really what's up here.
Correct.
I don't think that he thinks or anyone thinks that this ends with a conviction of an executive branch official for contempt. I think what it is his ability to spell out in exquisite detail just how aberrant and outrageous the government's behavior was here, whether it meets the technical criteria for contempt or disregard of a court order or not. It was a concerted, extraordinary effort to disregard and try to circumvent the known judicial processes in order to send almost 200 men to a brutal foreign prison in order to avoid judicial oversight. It is a 46-page illustration of what Harvey Wilkinson was talking about yesterday. And that's the important point of it. And I don't think that the technical legal details, which I'm happy to talk about, I really think they're secondary.
No, I completely agree. Let's return in a moment after Ruth talks not to the technical details, but to why exactly the spell out of this and the record matters so much.
So
Ruth.
I think it matters for the reasons that Marty said, and I agree that I don't think Judge Boasberg expects to see the head of ICE being hauled off in shackles. Though what a nice
the satisfying thing that would be.
Head shaved, tattoos showing somewhere anytime soon, or in fact any time.
Head of ICE isn't a Cubs fan, I'm told, so I don't know.
So yeah, that's a good point. But he might have tattoos. But that's not his goal. But I think there's a couple things that are important. The first, less important, is that even if you know how a story is going to end, and an episode is going to end, it is really important for all the reasons that have been said to play it out and get it on the record and to try to do what is possible to advance the rule of law. But there's a second thing for Judge Boasberg in particular, which goes to his not unique, but very high status. Maybe it's unique among among district court judges, which is if he can't stand up to these people, who can? If he is not going to stick up for the rule of law and not being stonewalled and disrespected and basically shafted by this administration, who can? So I think his willingness to keep sticking with it, because he could have chosen, once the jurisdiction in the case was removed, he could have chosen to back down, but he is in there for his fellow district court judges who may be less prominent, certainly less well known than he, to say, we need to stand up for the rule of law. And I think that's a very important message. And I think that Marty has some views about the administration's ability to appeal this order that we might want to talk about, but I don't think the rug is going to get pulled out from him anytime soon on this one.
So I agree with that. I want to pose a question to you both about the interaction of the political system and the legal system, which is, does Chris Van Hollen get a meeting last night with Kilmar Abrego Garcia in the absence of A, Judge Boasberg's ruling, and B, the Fourth Circuit and Judge Siniz's rulings? Because I don't think he does. I think a lone senator going to El Salvador and saying, I want to see a prisoner, is something that the administration of El Salvador can relatively easily ignore, but that there is actually political pressure being generated by these legal processes. Discuss.
So political pressure on who, Ben? Which is Stephen Miller feeling the heat? He is impervious to heat. And so I assume that El Salvador did not make Abrego Garcia available without the approval of the United States, even though it is, we are told, a sovereign nation. So somebody in the administration, maybe the ambassador to El Salvador, allowed this to happen and thought it was a good idea. But I see absolutely nothing else in the administration's vituperative and just completely hyperbolic response to the judicial orders that you mentioned. I see nothing else to suggest a backing down. So if there is political pressure, I don't understand where it's coming from or why there are no other manifestations of it.
Interesting. What do you think, Marty?
I'm the last person that would be an expert in this, but I can't imagine it's because of what Jed Boasberg and Harvey Wilkinson and Paul Azinas have written. That's not why Chris Van Hollen got an audience. As Ruth said, they're still filing every day. They're filing in the district court, declarations saying basically, screw you. We're not doing what you're going to tell us to do. We're not taking any other steps to get this guy released. They are not affected by the court orders at all. And in fact, the briefs that they're filing in the D.C. Circuit and the Fourth Circuit are just intemperate and outrageous and legally shoddy.
So first of all, I'm not sure that this is not a Salvadoran response, which is to say, if you're Nayib Bukele here, and just to be clear, Nayib Bukele is a really bad guy, but you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of, this is a domestic U.S. separation of powers issue. One part of government says we want him back. Another part of government says, no, keep him. You got to do what the Trump administration says. But you also don't want to be, you also don't want to be the bad guy here. And so I think, having, understanding that the U.S. government is divided on this and saying, hey, a senator comes down, the courts are upset, we'll show you he's alive, we'll have him sip coffee with Chris Van Hollen. And I don't believe that happens yesterday. It didn't happen the day before, and
I have a more cynical view,
yeah, go.
which is I think they think the politics of this is they like the photograph of Chris Van Hollen with this guy. This is the Democrats sit down with the terrorists, we jail them. That's going to be their pitch. And that's either right or wrong. I have no idea whether that's good politics or it's obviously quite contemptible. But I think they don't mind that contrast. They could have. I was fully thinking they might try to stop Van Hollen from meeting with him and say it's a violation of the Logan Act for him to go down there and do this. Well, you laugh, but they've
said similar things.
It's just about as old as the Alien Enemies Act. So don't.
Right.
Okay. So no, I think they think it's to their advantage to have these photo ops with Van Hollen with this guy.
What do you think, Ruth?
It's hard to know. It's interesting that it was not in a prison setting. It looked like it was a cafe. He was wearing normal clothes, though not. Did he have?
I think it was the U.S. Embassy,
cap
actually.
On. Yeah. So who knows? But there is just never any reason contra Judge Wilkinson to impute good motive to the people that we're dealing with, and I mean by that both Bukele and Trump. And I think that maybe he's worried about funding, congressional funding for El Salvador, but I think mostly he is a client state of Trump Inc. And so go back to this, whatever happened because the Trump administration allowed it.
To be clear, I am not attributing good motives to anybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hostage takers give you a proof of life video. That's not because they have good motives, but it is, I do think part of what they're doing here is they're showing the courts a proof of life video. And I don't believe they would have done a proof of life video with a senator yesterday without the pressure from the courts, but it's utterly unprovable. And
hey, Ben, this is the guy who texted "oopsie" to Judge Boasberg.
Yeah, that was before the litigation.
Okay. No, it was after he issued an order that was not an order according to the Trump administration, but was an order according to Judge Boasberg. I don't think his I know we agree on this, but his respect for the rule of law has not previously demonstrated itself.
Correct. The question is whether his sense of the U.S. government as divided and all the power being in one place and there being negative implications for him. My broader point here is that, we think of compliance as a binary, a kind of light switch that it either happens or doesn't happen. And we think of it as a moment in time, but it's actually neither of them. It should be both, right? The court orders something, you comply, you don't like it, you appeal. But in fact, compliance is really a process over time. And when you're measuring how the courts are doing against the Trump administration, the important question is not whether Judge Boasberg's order gets complied with in the moment. The important question is whether the courts have the tools over time to ensure compliance, or whether you can just defy them with impunity. And I'm not sure that this is not a process of the courts working their will on this situation. But I don't want to be overconfident about it.
So I think that the critical question is, how is the Supreme Court, having issued its ruling in JGG, having issued its order in Abrego Garcia, going to respond to what happened next? This is why I was more glass half full, glass half empty, completely befuddled by JGG, as opposed to Marty, who saw it very
Glass
half empty, I think. Yeah, and so I think that this is the Supreme Court has to be brought along because, you got 9 people there and you need 5 in a process of recognizing, assimilating, accepting that this is a administration that is rogue, to use a favorite Trump word, and that it doesn't deserve the presumption of regularity, something that you and I have both written about. Ben, thank you for all your posts on that, on lawfare. And so I think that the they I think the administration's behavior is, it's not calculated to, but it is going to, I think, have the effect of shoving at least a few of the conservative justices into the camp of, we cannot allow this. Discuss.
Yeah, what do you think, Marty? Is there any way that, let's start with Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, that even they look at this situation and see that deference to the executive branch is a plausible approach?
I don't know. I don't think they're very enamored of the way the Trump administration is acting, right? And I think they probably agree with Wilkinson and Boasberg and Zinnius that it's wrong. I do fear, and this goes back, this is a long-standing discussion we've been having, Ben, that they think both sides do it, and that there's equivalence in some sense, it's an obscene equivalence.
Right, because
Yeah.
one side allowed repayment of voiding of student debts,
Well,
and the other side locks people up and sends them to El Salvador. It's just
I don't
both
even know,
sides,
I
Marty.
don't even know what to. I mean, I really don't know. I'm not going to try to get into their heads. I think the more important question here, when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh, it's more complicated. He's obviously he quite admires Jeb Boasberg. He's very much a believer in the judiciary and the integrity of the judiciary. He also has very strong prior, substantive views about executive authority and deference in foreign affairs to the executive, particularly from the judiciary. And he doesn't want to see those undermined. And he probably understands that the Trump administration is doing it no favors by showing what the implications of an unfettered view of executive authority really looks like. This is not what he thinks, he thinks it ought to be exercised. But it's going to take some time for him to say there's a place where the judiciary says no on these things, I think. Barrett and Roberts are, it seems to me, the key. And there, I think it really is a matter, although I don't, I did see the JGG opinion as being mostly empty, wrong-headed in the sense that, A, the merits of the jurisdictional thing they did were so threadbare, and B, that they took it away from Boasberg. Those things bothered me a great deal. But I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, and maybe it was the best way in the long run for Roberts to calculate and to calibrate how the court should respond to Trump. So it remains to be seen. Maybe it was maybe it was a good judgment to make in the long run. And Boasberg still got an opportunity to spell out what's going on in his courtroom in this opinion, even after that. So I don't know what the time and place is for the court to push back. Right now, it still seems as if the court really pushes them to the mat, they are either going to facially disregard what the court says. I actually continue to think that's unlikely. Their modus operandi is to just take any ambiguity at all, any semicolon, and make it the holding of the case. And
right,
and
9-0. 9-0. They supported our position because the difference between facilitate and effectuate.
And but more importantly, eventually, I mean, so just to get into the merits of this a little bit, what Wilkinson and Zinnius and Boasberg and Roberts are all saying is, we know you have a very extensive diplomatic toolkit. You can get these guys home. You can take them out of Salvadoran custody. You have a lot of ways of doing it, and we're not going to tell you how to do it, and we're not even going to specify all the tools in the toolkit in our judicial opinions. That would be patronizing in a certain sense. Of course you have ways of doing this. Just get it done, right? And they come back and they're going to say at some point, what I fear is, we asked Bukele whether he would release this guy. He said no. And after that, we would have to pay costs that we don't want to pay in order to dissuade him from doing that. At that point, what does the court say? Do they say, no, you have to take the next several steps? You have to pay him more. You have to get the president on the phone as opposed to the ambassador. You have to do this, that, or the other. The courts don't want to do that. And that's what Wilkinson and Zinnius have said. It's like, that would be unseemly. We're acting like grown-ups. Why don't you do the same? But they're not dealing with grown-ups. They're not dealing with people who have any desire to do what Wilkinson assumes all government officials ought to be trying to do.
All right. So after the Fourth Circuit opinion, do you assume that I assume they will appeal this to the Supreme Court because they appeal everything on, whether or not an appeal actually lies under the circumstances. I assume the Supreme Court will act pretty quickly on this, although probably not as quickly as the Fourth Circuit did.
So I think it's important to understand what it is they would be appealing, because what they say in their briefs they're appealing is not really what they've been ordered to do. So what are they being required to do right now so far? Well, in Zinnius's courtroom, they're basically being required to tell her every 24 hours what they're doing to get this guy released from prison. And their answer every 24 hours is nothing more than what we've told you already. And they will be subject to the discovery, in which I think the most important single fact is, what are the terms of the deal that the United States and El Salvador have cut?
And also
there's a nice piece on our blog and yours this morning. This is something that Congress is entitled to know, so the judiciary should be entitled to know it.
Yeah, but I think there's two critical questions that are discoverable. One is one of the is El Salvador in fact an agent of U.S. detention right now, which I think the underlying facts will eventually support that.
Maybe.
But the second is, has any official of the United States government at any level taken any step to facilitate his return beyond Pam Bondi saying there are no domestic law obstacles? In other words,
Ben, they've answered that. They answer it at 5 p.m. every day. They say we have not done anything more.
No. What they say is we have no further updates. But it seems to me, if you're Paula Sines, you want to be able to say there have been no steps. Not merely that they have not.
What they say is we can't talk about whether there are steps because those are state secrets, and then you get a whole ancillary litigation on that question, and it's ridiculous. And so that's number one. So there's going to be subject to some discovery, and eventually, perhaps, civil contempt in Zinnius's courtroom, right? She's going to threaten to hold people in civil contempt in order to get the answers to her questions. In Boasberg's courtroom, the only order right now outstanding is identify the official who was responsible for not turning the planes around. That's the only injunction right now pending against them. And they have appealed that, although they haven't described that as the thing they're appealing. They've misdescribed his opinion as doing other things. And they've appealed that to the D.C. Circuit last night. And there, I think the D.C. Circuit's going to say, no, we're not at the point yet of you being prosecuted for contempt.
Right, it's not an appealable order.
And it shouldn't be an appealable order. The only thing they've been ordered to do is identify the person responsible.
Ruth, what do you think? What does the next few days of these appeals look like?
I think it looks like, and it's really time from my point of view, for not just the appeals court, but for the Supreme Court to say, just stop bothering us. this is not an emergency. You can't appeal it. We are not going to micromanage your spats with district court judges who have control, has important control over their courtroom. And it's just going to be a set of messages to the toddlers before them to stop bothering mommy and daddy and go away and start to comply. And, the start to comply part will be implicit if it's not explicit.
Interesting. Do you buy that, Marty?
Well, I believe that's what they ought to. I agree with Ruth. That's what they ought to do. I think that they, as demonstrated by them taking the case away from Boasberg and spreading it to 87 district court judges on habeas, I think that they have much better perspective than the rest of the judiciary about how to handle these things. And then even, agreeing in the Birthright citizenship case yesterday to have oral argument on the nationwide injunction question in that case and in that setting, they're very, very confident of their own ability, to work things out in ways that they think the lower courts are not as capable of doing. So I agree with Ruth about what they ought to do here, but it also depends on what they think the outcome will be, Ruth, if they do that, right? So what would it mean to say, stop appealing to us, denied, you must comply with the judicial orders below? If they fear they won't comply with those orders, what then? Right? I mean, they're
We're all
trying
going to
to
find,
get... Yeah.
The president has made clear that even if he would like to defy court orders, and even if Yale Law School graduate J.D. Vance believes he can defy court orders, that he does not want to be, validly accused of doing that. And so I think we're, heading towards this showdown, but the court is going to, I think, let the process proceed, let the contempt of these orders or not unfold, and then it's going to have to make itself a decision. I wonder if we could go back to the significance of because I don't really understand it, of how you guys read what Marty was referencing, which was the decision to hear oral argument in the Birthright citizenship case.
Yeah, Marty, how do you read it?
It's a bit mysterious. It's a bit mysterious, in part because I don't know what the internal norm is on the court. So most of your viewers probably don't know this. For several years now, the court's been taking a lot of criticism for deciding things on the so-called shadow docket without much briefing and argument. And in a number of cases in the last 2 or 3 terms, they've decided to have either grant cert and have expedited oral argument, or in a couple cases, actually have argument on the applications on the shadow docket without the full merits. In thinking that that's a process virtue. And yes, we'll hear it through more, and we won't just do it on the papers, and it'll be more deliberate. And that's actually been a virtue. That's been a good thing. And it's, it helps. It helps when you have oral argument. It helps when you have full briefing. Although in this case, my understanding is that there's probably won't be more briefing before the oral argument. We might hear more from the clerk today. But so I think there's partly it's that. It's not about the birthright citizenship case, and it's not about the nationwide injunction question. I just think it may be that when X number of justices say we really ought to have a public argument about this, the rest of the court or the chief defers to that and says, okay, that's going to be our norm going forward. It's a good thing for us to have an argument. So I think that's partly it. I don't know how many justices that is, 2 or 3 or 4, because it doesn't seem as though there are 5 justices who are very eager to put down bright lines against universal injunctions. We don't have time, but I mean injunctions that extend to non-parties, that protect non-parties.
And we're not getting to the merits here, right?
So we're not getting to the merits, but it's kind of lurking because it's this weird thing in which the plaintiffs are saying that you shouldn't be able to get interim relief even if the injunction is overbroad, if your odds of winning on the merits are like 0. It's weird to say the government should be able to keep acting in a way that is palpably illegal, even as to non-parties, and that the likelihood of success on the merits ought to at least influence whether this kind of remedy is there. I don't think, Ruth, it's the government now has 2 pages of briefing on the merits in its latest reply brief on this. I don't think the court. No, it's not going to be a merits decision. But what the justices think of the merits, or what they think of the merits, might influence how they resolve this question. But I don't think the oral argument is going to be about the merits.
And
It's going to
when
be
you're
about
up in
these broader questions that have been roiling the justices and the law reviews about the scope of relief when one plaintiff goes in and is trying to get either a vacatur or an injunction or something that protects not only the plaintiffs but also, and there's even ancillary questions here about state standing, about one of the injunctions extending to the internal operations of the agencies, about what they're doing to prepare for denying people citizenship and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of moving pieces here just on this one application. And maybe they just thought, we don't want to issue an opinion without showing, listening to the arguments and showing the public that we're taking it seriously. I would have thought they would have done it in an earlier case, though, where universal relief would have made less sense than it does here. Here it would be kind of nuts not, to let them take the citizen. Here, if you say you can't get this kind of universal injunction, what it means is then you're just going to have immediate litigation about a class that's defined as everyone who's a citizen who's now being denied citizenship by Trump, and you're going to get to the same place through class certification. And it seems like this is not the ideal case to be arguing this point, but here we are.
And just to be clear, when you're up in the middle of the night worrying on the merits of birthright citizenship, I'm presuming that is not one of the things that's keeping you up, or am I being overly optimistic?
I wasn't being kept up by presidential immunity in criminal cases either, I gotta tell you.
That's about my reaction, Ruth. I think the overwhelming likelihood is that the court will, perhaps unanimously or at least overwhelmingly, say that the proclamation is invalid. The easiest way to get there is to say that it violates the statute without reaching the 14th Amendment question. I think that's the likely outcome. That said, you can see that there's already a movement among certain Republican conservative scholars and others to be trying to normalize this idea and to make it part of the mainstream of the way things are going, in the same way that's been done in these other contexts. Even much more so than on immunity. There's much more support from people who are thought to be serious scholars. The scholarship is actually quite miserable, but it's it's now running into the hundreds of pages. And so I worry about it, although I think the high likelihood is that on the merits, they will at least rule on the statutory question that Congress has said that these folks are all citizens. Just because we're verging on the 9 o'clock hour, I just want to add another, I also hope the court will find it easy on the merits eventually, and I hope sooner rather than later, to rule that the Alien Enemies Act proclamation is invalid. And I do think the courts, both the Supreme Court and the lower courts, seem to be allergic to reaching the merits on this. I think the merits are very, very easy, particularly on the question of whether this terrorist group is a nation or a government, which it clearly is not. That would just be a very easy way of resolving the case.
So
And,
I
and
100%.
once they do,
I'm sorry.
if I'm right that they will do that, and I hope I'm right about that, what happens to the 180 some people who are in the Salvadoran prison? We're going to have a redux, but 187 times over, of the Abreu Garcia problem.
I 100% agree with the notion that the Alien Enemies Act is not applicable, usable here. But I do think that I'll be done in a second. Okay. Oh, we have another. My husband says we have another hour that we can
Before
go
my-
before
before
his
my conference
important
No,
call.
no, we have
So,
exactly
yeah.
6 minutes, and I have to change the
I-
subject
Okay.
and use like 3 of them for a
But-
different matter.
but-
So finish up your point.
Okay, so really quickly, the alien enemy, the Supreme Court, among others, and this is why JGG is not as terrible as Marty thinks, has made it much less attractive as a vehicle. Because if you can use the Alien Enemies Act, even assuming arguendo that you could use it, if you have to provide due process before you deport somebody, then it becomes not very much more attractive wherever the venue is than using the INA. So a very smart person made this point to me, and I'm going to just adopt it for my own.
Was that me?
All right. I want to change the subject, and I'm going to change it by asking, when shall we 3 meet again in thunder, lightning, and in rain? Because this seems to me to be a conversation that we should be having on a semi-regular basis, whether Ruth is in Spain or in Wyoming, and whether, because Marty's up all the time because he doesn't sleep anymore. And it seems to me that we should gather periodically and have these conversations.
We need to have them when I'm not in Wyoming because the time difference works a lot worse on that one, but I'm coming back.
All right. Marty, are you in for this trio of witches meeting on a semi-regular basis at 8 a.m. Washington time?
I can't guarantee anything, but sure, yes.
I take that as a yes. Can't guarantee anything translates in Wittes English to sure whenever you say.
That's a 9-0 win.
It's a 9-0 win. Yeah, and I have Stephen Miller here to declare that I prevailed 9-0 in front of the Supreme Court. All right. Quick wrap. Marty, what are you looking for over the next few days? Ruth, the same. And then I'll give my brief prediction.
I think I've already nothing more than what I've said already. And if I did predict something, it's sure to be inaccurate. So I'll leave it at that.
You're a terrible pundit, Marty. Ruth, you're a superb pundit. What are you looking for over the next few days?
The Alhambra. Tickets are very hard to come by.
But you have
so
them?
John Leibowitz here has, I believe, procured them.
Wow.
So we shall see.
That's what I can procure.
we will report back.
Some of those Europeans are now visiting southern Spain rather than the United States, right?
I have never been to Spain.
It's lovely.
The Alhambra is really, I mean, I haven't been in many years, but it's really extraordinary.
Madrid's a very cool city. My prediction is to watch the contumacious behavior continue to unfold before the district courts and for the appeals courts to swat away challenges to that, both on behave grounds and on technical legal grounds, but mostly because of the toddler situation that they're confronting.
Right. So we are going to leave it there, folks. I'd always try to leave you with the bright side of the situation, and I am going to do that today. One bright side of the current moment is that we all get to use the word contumacious, which, 2 years ago, you would have said this word is going the way of the dodo, but now we use it on television. We use it in newspaper articles, and I think it's good for the word contumacious. It's good for the word contemnor, which is different from condemnor. And I think the revival of words is a good thing. We should thank our president for making contumacious great again.
Wait till we get to 12-letter Wordle, right?
Yeah. So
no, I've been going around saying that I think I wrote somewhere that they're being both contumacious and contemptuous at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Ruth Marcus, heroic appearance, MVP of the show today, Spanish train Wi-Fi. come on, guys, that is impressive. Marty
No, it's
Lederman,
impressive that I managed to get everything connected.
and Ruth's technical skills are superb. Marty's technical skills are disastrous, but we love you anyway.
Proud of it.
And proud of it. We will be back, folks, on Monday. I have no idea who my co-hosts are going to be. I have no idea who the guests are going to be, but I know one thing. I'll be there, and probably so will you. See you later.